Oh, wait, where do we go? Yeah, I think we should. Just make sure the lock block is engaged so that we don't have to get up. So this was right around the time last year also. I looked back, I actually pulled up last year's canvas, and I must be a creature of habit because it was right around the beginning of March where last year I pretty much, and I'm not saying that we're completely done with doing like harder mathematics. Don't misinterpret, but I'm going to try to focus now, just like I did last year from March, April, May, on mathematics that feels a little bit more relevant to you. Um, like I know solving quadratics, a lot of the things we do, they don't feel very personal to you, but I'd kind of like to send you out of here in May with some knowledge of some life hacky kind of things, like the basics of what it means to pay taxes, how to fill out just a basic tax form, how to get a good credit score, what hurts your credit score, budgeting, things that feel like, hey, that's useful, you know? So that's what we're going to do primarily for the next however long that is, like 12 weeks or something like that. So we're going to start today, and eventually we'll get to IXL, but I had a couple of main topics that I wanted to go over with you first before I kick you into IXL. Am I safe to assume you guys all have IXL accounts, yeah, right? In my class, we how long ago was that? Oh, so it hasn't been that long. Oh yeah, right. So we're good. Nice. So I think I want to make sure I have my thoughts in order. There's the things I want to accomplish with you today are how to calculate how much sales tax is on something, how much something is discounted at a store, how much something is marked up, like by a store owner who, like, they might buy a pair of shoes for $30, but they turn around and sell them for $74.99. I'd like to teach you how to calculate a markup on that. And I'd also like to teach you how to estimate tips when you're at a restaurant and you have to pay your dinner bill, which is more relevant to you guys being a little bit older than it would be to say like a room full of eighth graders, right? Because you guys are at that point now where you're probably going out. That's more of a regular occurrence at this age than it was years ago. So let us start with tips. So today is March the 6th. And so I think I want to cover as many of those topics as I possibly can. Hang on a second, I have to pause this. So let's start with tipping. I am not I'm not saying that no one should ever use a calculator, but my goal for this little 5 or 10 minute lesson is to get you to a point where you can estimate a tip on a check without having to bust out like the calculator on your phone or something like that. So there's one section of Delta Math that I'm going to have you do, or not Delta, sorry, the IXL that I'm going to have you do, and I'm going to try to walk you through and cover it. And if as always, if things come up when I get you to the assignment part of the day and you go, whoa, like this looks a little different, then just let me know. But here's the idea. Do you guys know what a standard tip is when you go out to eat? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it kind of varies. I think that the going theory, the first thing you guys need to understand is that waiters and waitresses, they make a very low hourly wage. Are you aware of that? Have any of you guys served before, waited tables? Because it's low, right? Like I did it. I know I did it right after I did it for the summer between my graduating from college and before I became a teacher. And I know that the hourly wage, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it was honestly like $2 an hour or something like that, which I know you say that's below minimum wage, but what happens is servers live on their tips, right? You get that. So you may walk out as a server from an 8 hour night exhausted and you only maybe made $18 for your hourly pay from the restaurant, but you also probably more than likely made $40 or $50 an hour in tips. And so that's why it's so important that we tip servers. So yeah, nice. Yeah, and I don't want to put this part on the recording because I don't want to get all high and mighty, but let me pause that. anyhow, we're talking about waiters and waitresses here. So a standard tip is I believe, I mean, I kind of subscribe to the mentality that 20% is like the gold standard. Like I, and again, I don't want to impose my opinions on you, but I think if someone provides you relatively good service, like, you don't have to wait 5 minutes to get a drink refill, they check in on you periodically, that 20% is just a kind, good gesture to give somebody. And you kind of want to scale it generally down from there. If someone goes way above and beyond, you could say, oh, this person, I'm gonna tip them 30%. Like that's wonderful. And like maybe that's how some servers, maybe why they're so good is they love that extra cash. But 20% is pretty much you did a good job. This is normal. And we scale our way down from that. And then there's 15%. And then really, we're at a point now where unless someone really does something egregious or offensive, 10% is still just a common courtesy. So, like, even if you had to wait a long time and the service was really poor, you still, again, maybe this is just my opinion, but you should still give 10%. Like, that person needs that money to pay the rent and pay the light bill and stuff like that. So, so this is all stuff maybe you guys already know. So the question becomes, if I'm sitting in a restaurant and my check comes, how do I calculate the tip without having to bust out my phone? And so let's practice. Let's start with the easiest one, which is not the one you will use the most, but this is going to be our building block for the others. So if I'm sitting in a restaurant and I get my check, my bill comes, and say I take someone out for a dinner, like my wife or my girlfriend or my boyfriend or whoever you take out, whatever it is, and your check comes to $37.68. I don't know how many of you already know this life hack, but calculating a tip in your head is actually remarkably simple. So what the going theory on this is, we don't want to make our lives hard. Like we always want to try to do stuff like this in the real world so that we don't have to bust out the phone calculator. So the strategy that I will give you is let's start by rounding this up to the nearest whole dollar. So if I round this up, what is it? It's 38 bucks, right? So now in my brain, when I'm sitting there at the table, I'm just going to round up. And honestly, as a courtesy, rounding up, even if it was $37.25, just as a courtesy to my server, I might still round up because at the end of the day, it's not going to affect me very much. Like if I just spent 40 bucks on a couple of dinners, an extra 50 cents on the tip really shouldn't matter, right? So rounding up is a good practice. So now I've rounded my checkup in my head to $38. And I don't want you to leave high school without knowing this, but how do you calculate 10% of something? Do you know this? Well, yeah, like I'm honored if I'm thrilled and honored and really just stoked if I'm the first person that's ever taught you this, how easy this is. Yes, you literally just insert the decimal point, you move it one place to the left. So like 10% is the easiest thing in the world because you don't have to be a mathematician to look right at $38 and say, oh, if I'm going to give you a 10% tip, then that is just straight up $3.80. And again, I obtained that through no black magic or witchcraft. I just took the decimal that was right here. You see where I just drew it in there, and I just moved it one place to the left and went, that's 10%. So far, so good. So when I'm at a restaurant and I want to calculate a 20% tip, I build my 20% tip off of my 10% tip. Because if you think about it, what is 20%? And I'm sorry if this is insulting, but what is 20% compared to 10%? It's double. I mean, you could say it's 10 more, but it's literally double, right? So if I know what a 10% tip is, and in my mind, let me put a green box around it, and I say, okay, a 10% tip is this much, right? How could I very quickly then modify that to say, I want to leave 20%? What would I do? I would do it times two. And listen, I'm sorry if I'm wrong. I mean, no ill will, or I don't want to hurt feelers when I say this, but past the age of, say, like 12 or 13, we all should be able to double 3.8 in our heads. Sorry if I'm not right, but I think that's a fair expectation. What is double $3.80? $7.60. So if you ask me to calculate a 20% tip at a restaurant, and when I'm sitting here teaching it to you for the first time, yeah, I get it. It took 4 minutes, but when I'm doing it by myself, it doesn't take but just a couple of seconds. Move the decimal, you got your 10%, and then you can do it that 10%, whatever floats your boat. So which begs then maybe the trickier question. So let's say the service wasn't bad, but it also you don't think was really up to par. Like it wasn't great, but it wasn't bad enough to deserve 10%. That puts us in the tricky spot, the dreaded 15%. Where 15% is like your way of saying you did okay, like it's fine, but you could have done better. So do you want to think creatively? How could I do a tip of 15%? Again, the goal is always to not have to bust out some stupid little card with numbers on it or a phone or something. How could I get creative and find 15%? That's a start for sure. Absolutely. So let's think about what 15% is. 15% is just 10% and 5% added together, right? And we already know 10%. And what was 10% again on our check? 380. You'd be surprised how capable your brain is uh, when you just let it do things like this. And 5% is half of 10%, right? So what's half of 380? Oh, good. Let me finish this real quick, okay? What is half of 380? What's half of like, no, good try. 190, right? It's a little shy of $2 because we're a little shy. So we have $1.90 because 19 is half of 38, right? So if I wanted to do a 15% tip, I could just take my whole 10% and my modify added half 10%, which is $1.90. And again, I add those together, and what do I get? 570. So let's say that even that math, which I'm sorry, I think that was pretty straightforward. Let's say even that math was a little bit daunting for you. You could even take and be a little bit more generous if you'd like. Because again, at the end of the day, if we start monkeying around with numbers, really, we're only affecting our pocketbook by 30, 40, 50 cents, maybe a dollar, whereas we're making our lives easier. So let's take this even another stretch further. And let's take this 37.68. So your check comes and you just want to make your life as easy as you can. And again, I don't mean to sound rude, but at the end of the day, if an extra dollar on the tip is something you can't afford, maybe you should consider that you shouldn't be eating out, right? So if I could take this 37.68, I could even do a little bit more and I could round it all the way up to $40, which might seem a little odd, but let's watch how easy it is when we do it like this. So if I round it up to $40, let's start with our baseline. What is our 10% tip on $40? That's simple pimple, right? $4. So how am I going to calculate 20%? I'm going to double it, $8. And then if you think about 15%, 15% is just smack dead in the middle of those two. So 15% is just a nice, easy $6. And if you go back and look at when we did it all uptight and exact, just like a minute ago, all uptight and exact, look at what our 15% tip was, 570. And at the end of the day, if I just go loosey goosey and I round it a little bit more, and then I do my tip on this, I'm off by 30 cents. And that should not hurt my pocketbook, 30 cents. And then the server would undoubtedly appreciate your generosity. So I would like you to learn that today. And we're going to practice that when you want to find a tip, you try to avoid the use of the calculator by rounding and then moving decimals around. You just practice it. It gets really easy after a while. So good, good. All right. The other skills I want you to learn today, I'll try to get through this quick. I have to pause real quick and get her test, and then I'll come back. The other thing I want to talk about is discounts and sales tax and markups. So give me just a second. So the other one that was on my list today was just how to work with money and prices of things. So let's say you walk into a store and something on the shelf was marked at $60. And then there's a big red cross through it and it says on sale. It says sale price $42.99. So a skill we want you to possess is the ability to calculate what percentage of a sale that was. And it's again, like a lot of things with basic money, it's like the tipping that you just learned. It's not that hard, really. So there's a little formula that I'm going to give you. Does anyone think they know what the formula is, like how to calculate a discount percentage? If I gave it to you easy, Like what I'm going to write in red. If I said the original price is $60 and the sale price was $30, like you would go, oh, that's a 50% half off, right? So the sum math is really easy. But when it's a little more awkward like this, there's a really cool formula you can use. Does anyone know it by chance? You're going to use it a lot today. So write this down, okay? It's going to be the amount of change divided by the original amount. This little formula will get you a lot of places in applied math in the real world, simple applied math in the real world. And so you want to make sure to stay true to this. And when I say amount of change, that can mean up or down. Okay. So like in this case, the amount of change is going to be how much did 60 have to change to become 42.99? And this one you will use a calculator for, just FYI. This is not mental math anymore. So that's what amount of change means. And then the original amount, not to insinuate that you wouldn't have figured this out, but the original amount is how much something cost before the discount was applied. So let's put some faces with the names here. In this particular problem, how much did 60 have to change to become 42.99? How much? Yeah, so the difference between them is, I think, $17. You're fine, and 1 cent. Everybody okay with how I did that? I just subtracted. And if it went up, I would still subtract. I'm going to take one. Generally, people take the bigger one minus the smaller one, whatever order that means, just because you want what's called a positive difference. And so there's $17 and a penny difference between those two yellow circles or ovals. And then I'm going to divide it by the original amount. And how much did the item originally cost? $60. This little formula can apply to so many different things in the real world. Oh my goodness. How much does something change divided by what was it before I changed it? And then when I type that into my little calculator, I'm going to type it in 17.01. I'm going to divide it by straight up 60. And I'm going to move the decimal 2 places to the right. We always move 2 places to the right. So the calculator screen will show you this number, 0.2835. For us, that means it was a 28.35% markdown or discount. Got it? Now it also works the other way. Let's say you happen to know like a friend that owns uh, a store of some kind, and they buy. I think the example I used earlier was shoes. So let's say you talk to someone who works at a shoe store, and you know for a fact that they got a certain pair of shoes from the manufacturer directly for $30. That's what they paid for that pair of shoes. But then when they put it out on the shelf, they mark it at 84.97, which is not unrealistic. Like it happens all the time, right? It's how the world works. And so I'm an owner. I paid $30 to get it off the truck into my store, and then I turn around and I mark it up to 84.97, and someone comes in and buys the shoes. The question isn't at the end of the day, how much money did I make? The question is, what was the percent that I marked up the shoes? And so in light of that, let's use our formula. How much did the price change to go from here to here? 54. So it went up by $54.97. And this is the kicker. What do we divide by? 30. Always the original. Good job, you guys. 30. Always divide by where it started. Sometimes people start to think, oh, I should divide by this now. Don't think about it. Just whatever it was before it changed, that's what you divide by. And then we're going to type this one in, and this one's going to look and feel a little bit different. But you would agree, just from looking at it, common sense, that it's more than 100% markup, right? Like 100% markup would have brought it up to $60. And a 200% markup would have brought it up to 30, 30, 30, $90. So we're somewhere in that 100 and something. So that sounds about right, buddy, for sure. So 54.97 divided by 30 comes out to, and if I round a little bit, I would say 183. And just for you guys who don't have calculators out, the calculator screen shows 1.8323 repeating. So if someone said, give me an answer for this, I would move the decimal twice, like I always do. And like Dalton said, it's about 183.23% markup. which is pretty obscene, but it's actually not. Um, yeah, I mean, if you're ever not sure, just ask. But like when you're doing your IXL work here in a little bit, it'll tell you what to put. Like, and a lot of theirs come out really nice. Like you're going to get things like 16.5%. But if you're not sure, just ask. Okay, so that's how we do discounts, and that's how we do markups. And then I believe the last thing on my checklist was to just talk about sales tax. So sales tax can be accomplished a couple of different ways. So let's say that you go to the store and you buy a shirt and it was marked at $24.99. And then when you get to the register, as you know, you guys have to pay sales tax, right, on anything. And sales tax varies from state to state. I believe sales tax in Wyoming is generally 6 cents. Is that right? And then every once in a while they pass an extra penny. Because are you guys ever aware of that when they use the extra penny tax, right? Yeah, there's all sorts of taxes, and we're going to talk so much about taxes that my goal is to get you out of here in May and feel like you're going to know more about taxes and um, credit scores and things like that than I did until I was like 30. That's my goal. Yeah, figured. So, anyways, this is just a basic sales tax. So I look at the little sticker on the shirt and it says 24.99. And then when I get up to the counter, what's that going to be? Let's say it comes out to about 26.34. So, like, if it's your first time shopping, you might go, "Hey, what's going on? I thought the sticker said 24." But this isn't my first rodeo. Like, I know what's going on. So, obviously, there's sales tax that goes to the government, and then I want to know what was my percent of sales tax. So, honestly, this might be disguised as a new topic, but at the end of the day, it's really no different than a markup. It's like the government's way of marking something up, and so we're going to follow the same formula. How much did the cost change from the time I looked at the sticker until I swiped my credit card? Like, in other words, how much does 24.99 change up to become 26.34? I don't think so. I think you should subtract that again. It's $1.35. So the amount of change in this case is it went up $1.35. Remember, that's always what's going to go on top is just number wise, not percentage, just number wise. How much did something change? That's the goal. And then what always goes on the bottom? The original cost of the shirt, which in this case is 24.9. So when we divide that out, 1.35 divided by 24.99, move the decimal over twice, you would figure out that you paid around 5.4% sales tax on that. Got it? Those were the four things I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to explain to you. And when you get to the tipping part on IXL, I would appreciate it. I'm not going to like police it, but I would appreciate it if you try to do those in your head. That would be pretty cool. Practice that. And then when you get to the other parts that involve the sales tax, the discounts, the markups, that one is going to be calculator village. So we good? All right, so I'm going to leave this recording going just long enough so I can tell you what skills I want you to do on IXL. I don't mean you have to get them all done. And you guys know how IXL works. Like there's this thing called a SMART score. And ideally, what we always want is for your SMART score to be above 90. But if you really want to make sure that you've mastered a concept, you can get your SMART score to a straight up 100. 100 is like crushed it. Yeah, full mastery. But as far as like what's acceptable, you should set your own standard, but I think you shouldn't set it any lower than 90, right? Don't settle for an 82, right? Make sure 73 is not going to cut it. All right. You're better than that. Um, anyways, you go into the challenge zone. Are you guys familiar with that? Once your smart score gets past 90, it says you're now entering the challenge zone, I think is what it says. And then the questions from 90 to 100 are a little bit harder. So that's always the goal. All right, so first off, the first skill that I want you to work on is, and I would love it if you'd write these down like now so that I don't have to scroll back to this in a minute. The first one is S6X. You know how to do a search in IXL. You just search that in and it'll bring up the skill. This is the one where we're estimating tips. So this is also the one where I would appreciate it if you not use your calculators. Listen, if you absolutely have to, okay, fine. You're the one that's got to sleep tonight. The next skill that I want you to do is, these ones are actually kind of related. I think they're both cut from the same cloth. PBM, and I believe Kentucky Chicken Fried. I think these are both going to be on sales tax, discounts, and markups. So that's kind of where I'd like us to be, at least for the end of the day today and possibly into the day tomorrow, depending on how long this takes. So, got it? And that's kind of where I want to go with this class from this point on, is more towards talking about things like uh, that are going to help you be better citizens. I didn't know squat about money or taxes or how any of that worked, honestly, until I had a reason to have to learn when I was like getting into the buying a house phase of life. So I'd like it if you guys could know some basics before you leave. Real worldy stuff, you know. All right. Cool. Okay. Well, I am pausing. I'm not pausing. I'm ending the recording. I think so. Done. Done.